Hello there guys, my name is Sam Johnson. I'm a pastor in a church in the Welsh Valleys, and I'm basically wanted to start this little teaching series about the idea of hope. Now I don't know about you, but being in the middle of this coronavirus, dealing with lockdown, dealing with so many different issues has brought up a lot of questions about the idea of hope. And maybe you're watching this, maybe you're a Christian, maybe you have no idea about faith or you're against it, but you've been thinking about this idea of hope. Now in the Christian message we talk about hope all the time. We have a hope in Jesus, and basically I wanted to go through this in a few different weeks and explain the idea and the message of hope. Why? Well, because I believe hope is one of the most incredible and important messages, especially right now. And so over these coming weeks I'm going to be talking about a different aspect of what the Bible, or why the Bible says that we can have hope. I'm going to hope to bring in loads of different people's testimonies that can show that it's not just me, but that loads of people have experienced this hope that the Bible brings, that God brings to us. And so that's my plan, that we'll go through different things each week. Most likely it'll be every week, depending on if I get the content out in time. But as I said, I'm going to be focusing on what the Bible says. I believe that the Bible, the message of Jesus, that the Bible is all about, is just the most incredible message and story of love and faithfulness that is out there. And so if you're watching, I believe that it's for you. It's not just for me, a pastor, it's not just for Christians, it's for every single person to receive this message of hope. And so if you're struggling with that, I hope that this means something and speaks to you today. So today, before I go into the ideas of why we have hope, I want to go into the idea of what is hope. What does it actually mean? So to start with that, I want to look at the ancient Hebrew word for hope. And there are a few words that are used, and why it's ancient Hebrew is because that's the original language that the Bible was written in, or the Old Testament was written in, the first section of the Bible. And this is all about the stories about people that came before Jesus, but everything was pointing towards what Jesus would do. Now there are two words for hope in the Old Testament. The first is yachal, I think I pronounced that right, Y-A-K-H-A-L, yachal, and it means to wait for, it just means waiting. The second is kavah, Q-A-V-A-H, and again it means waiting, but it actually means the waiting in the tension of expectation of a breakthrough. The tension, waiting in the tension of expectation of a breakthrough. Now it comes from the word Kav, the first three letters, Q-A-V, and that means cord, and it's the idea of when you pull a cord tight, it's that waiting as it gets tenser and tighter until it snaps, and it's that idea of you're waiting in the tension until something happens. And so here, as we do that, we need to think and distinguish between the idea of earthly hope and biblical hope. Now standard hope, hope that maybe you feel on a day-to-day basis, just a basic hope for life, often it would be known as optimism, just hoping for the best. It's actually based on the hope or the belief that a situation might or could change, and change for the better. It's this hope and this sort of, it could happen, it might happen, let's just wait and see. And it's purely circumstantial. It's purely based on what you see around you and whether the likelihood of that of it changing for good or for what you would hope for, if it's likely to happen. But here's where biblical changes, because biblical hope doesn't base itself on circumstances. It bases itself on the promises of God's goodness revealed in Jesus. It bases itself on the promise of God's goodness revealed in Jesus. So it's actually based on a bigger plan than earthly pleasure, on comfort, on ease. It's based on something bigger and better and more substantial than that hope. And so it's important to recognize that these two hopes are different. It is different. Desmond Tutu says this: hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. And Martin Luther King Jr. says that we must accept finite disappointment but never lose infinite hope. We must accept finite disappointment, short-term disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. Now why have I said those quotes? Well, it just brings us back to the idea that hope cannot be based on circumstances. Because as we sit in the middle of coronavirus, as we sit in the middle of something that is so damaging to our culture, so damaging to our connection with others, our hope has to be built on something bigger than what we see around us, and that's what biblical hope does. In fact, the greatest example of biblical hope is Jesus on the cross. It is actually the death of Jesus, something that looks so hopeless, a situation that looks so out of reach and lacking in hope, that actually brought about the most surprising end result, which was a victory, which was freedom for us. So actually biblical hope is where in the midst of hopelessness, God, our trust in God, brings a hope and a glory for victory and for greatness and for the best outcome. It might not always be our chosen outcome, but the best outcome for us. So without God, you have to look at your present to define your hope for the future. But biblical hope is the process of looking back at Jesus on the cross, and that being the basis of your hope for the future. And this is the heart of this message, that out of the most hopeless situations, God can bring victory and joy. It is actually in the hopelessness that God's hope prevails. So the question is, what does that mean for you today? What does that mean for you in the midst of coronavirus? Well, guys, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, I can tell you this, that there is a hope available for you that endures through everything. The book of Hebrews, a book in the New Testament, the end section of the Bible, says this, that hope is the anchor for the soul. Hope is the anchor for the soul. It is the very thing that holds the soul firm when you feel that all is ending. Maybe you've been in a time and a space where it feels like I just can't go on. Can I tell you, hope is the thing you need, because it is the anchor for the soul, and not a hope based on earthly circumstances, but a hope based on the truth of who God is, on his goodness, and what Jesus will do in the midst of hopeless situations. So having hope for you and me today is a choice to wait in the tension of expectation. I'm not telling you that hope will give you exactly what you want this evening, tomorrow, or next week. Hope is waiting in the tension of expectation that God will bring around a good, and in fact the best future, out of what might be a terrible present moment for you. Maybe you have family who are ill, maybe you are ill yourself, maybe you've suffered loss, maybe you're struggling financially or emotionally or mentally. Guys, hope is waiting in the tension of the expectation that God will bring about something amazing, and it will come. So here's the takeaway point today, guys, for this first section. Hope is not found in the absence of struggle, but in the trusting of something, or I would say someone, bigger than the struggle. Because it is in the midst of struggle that biblical hope flourishes. Let me say that again. It is in the midst of struggle that biblical hope flourishes. Nelson Mandela says this: may your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears. May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears. So guys, when our hope is in God, in his goodness, even in the midst of difficulty, even in the midst of something might be the hardest thing you've ever had to go through, actually when we live out of when our choices reflect our hopes, and our hope in God, our hope not in our circumstance, but in our hope that he will bring goodness out of the hopelessness, then actually we get to choose and we get to live out of the kindness, out of his love, out of his mercy, out of his grace to others. And in that way, not only do we receive hope ourselves, not only do we live out of the hope that has been given by God, but we get to extend hope to others. So guys, there's the introduction on what hope is and how we can live it out. Coming in the coming weeks, we're going to be looking at the ideas of that why God gives us hope, the fact that he takes away the sin of our past, the fact that he is with us in our present, the fact that he has given us a promise for the future, and so many other things. But for now, guys, that is the reason, and that is what hope is all about.